Welcome to Into the Archives. What can I say? On the back of the book is the only ubiquitous line of the book. About three things I was absolutely positive. First, Edward was a vampire. Secondly, there was a part of him, and I didn't know how dominant that part of him might be, that thirsted for my blood. And third, I was unconditionally and irrevocably in love with him. Some of the blurbs say, deeply seductive and extraordinarily suspenseful, Twilight is a love story with bite. The New York Times Editor's Choice and Amazon Best Book of the Decade so far, which I find interesting that it's been placed on there. A Teen People Hot List pick, Publisher's Weekly Best Book of the Year, propelled by suspense and romance in equal parts. This story will keep readers madly flipping the pages of Meyer's tantalizing debut. That much is true, because if you don't keep flipping the pages, you don't find anything. This book, I didn't want to do this book at first, but I had emails and people, ever since they found out I did a book review show, asking me to do this book. And I've got to say, there are two phases of this review. There's the talking about the book, and there's the talking about the movie. In equal parts, granted. The movie's better. I don't say that about many movies that have been turned into film from books, the adaptations. Because most of the time, film adaptations of books suck. And even the good adaptations, like Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, they hit the nail on the head with some things, and then they fail in other things. Most and foremost, Lord of the Rings, turning Gimli into the comedic sidekick. There were a lot of people that were upset about that. But that's another review entirely. When I originally set out to do this book review, I thought about making it a game. Thinking about taking a shot every time Bella was a whiny, spoiled brat. Because that's how I remember her being somewhat from the movies. But I picked up the book and read the first chapter, and my liver immediately said, please don't. I can't take anymore. My liver was done by the first chapter. So, in all actuality, in honesty, I can't be too hard on the book. Well, I can, but I can't be too hard on it because there's not enough substance there to be hard on. To start with, the story of Twilight is a good idea. It's a good concept. You know, it's a good basis for a romantic setting. It's just told so poorly. And I mean, poorly told. It has no drive. It has no sense of panache. It's just badly told. I can't think of a story that's more badly told that could have been so good.
Look. Branded by Pulse. I'm a Lassie. Enemy of Cocoon. Who are you?
I've got a few screws loose, but I'm a Lassie, same as you.
Point is, I have people I can count on. I'll make it through. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
The very existence of you, Lassie, puts every last one of us in danger. Tell me, Do you really think your life is worth more than the lives of millions of Cocoon citizens?
Well, okay, that's an example. But let's break it down. First off, we have our main character, the protagonist, Bella Swan. And I'm convinced that's just a thinly veiled reference to all the great vampire novels and stories of the past. Don't believe me? First name, let's look at the character's name, Bella. Who is the most iconic player of a vampire in the last 120 years? Bela Lugosi for his portrayal of Dracula in 1931. Well, surely that's just a coincidence. But let's look at the last name of Swan, which again harkens to the 1931 Dracula film, which used Swan Lake Overture as its main theme. Still think it's just a coincidence? So did a lot of friends of mine. But she is your typical high school girl. And for those of us who don't remember what high school girls were like, they're just like every other person in the world. They have opinions, they have self-doubt, they have everything. This was a story capable and rife with possibility. So the story starts off and she's complaining and contemplating the fact that she has to move into a small town with her father where he is the sheriff. This town is called Forks. Yes, it's called Forks. I can't make this up. So there's actually a committee that deals with poorly named story ideas and town names. And I'm going to turn to the chairman of that committee right now and get his opinion on the name of Forks for this town. Liam?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I've a city to destroy.
Thank you, Liam. Well, let's move on. So, it's the typical high school romance at first glance. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy. Girl gets mildly infatuated with the boy, but there's just something a little off about him. And, you know, is it the fact that he should be dead? Because last time we saw him in films, he was killed by a wormtail. I don't know. Well, the things that are odd and off about him are because he's this universe's version of a vampire. And all the odd things that go with it. Which is where a lot of my personal prejudices start coming in, because I can't buy into the idea of vampires that sparkle. I grew up with vampires that either A, were powerless in the daylight, or B, burst into a giant tower of flame while screaming if the daylight touched them. To me, it just looks like they took the actors and pushed them into a giant vat of glitter. Like I said, it's a good concept. It's just poorly told. And here's part of why it was poorly told. In storytelling, there's a concept called rising action. It's what gives the story tension. It's what gives the story a drive. It's what gives the story a satisfying conclusion after the epic climax. And it was absent here. Completely lost. It's just not here. I felt no tension anywhere, no impending threat. Even the hunt sequence in the third act was just lackluster. It didn't fill me with a sense of worry or wonder or suspense. The one sequence in the book that should have done something to drive the character. And the characters are another place where I have an issue. They were practically well-written characters that just don't have any change. They felt there was no growth by the end of the book of either of the main characters. Bella still wants to jump his bones, and that Mother doesn't want to have all that much to do with her but be friends. The only character that I actually felt that was alive, for lack of a better term, was Alice. Alice was, in both the book and the movie, the most interesting character to me, and I would be perfectly willing to read a book just about Alice, provided it's not written by Stephanie Meyer. If anything changes about these characters, their focus changes. Bella goes from admiring Edward the boy to admiring Edward the vampire with no real effect of change occurring here. I mean, it's like, I used to complain about the movie of how Kristen Stewart was quite possibly the worst actress they could have picked to convey the character. You know, she was flat, she was emotionless, she had no expressions on her face other than, wow, or complete disinterest. And then I read the book, and I was like, wow, if anything, Kristen Stewart oversold it, because she actually projected a little bit of disinterest. Whereas the entire book, it's like Bella's reading from her diary 15 years later, and it doesn't move her anymore. Or she's trying to fit all this on a note card for a speech class. You know, and it extends into the other books as well, I'm sure. Just look at the culture that we had while these books were being produced. We had Team Edward and Team Jacob, because some people were hard and fast wanting Edward to be with Bella, and then we had just as many people hard and fast wanting Jacob to be with Bella, to the point that there was actually 2 girls who went to prom with this image on their dresses. You can Google it. I'm not joking. As if it mattered in the larger focus of life. I can understand having a favorite character. I can. You can have a favorite character. You can have a fandom. I do. But the actual arguments and complete, it just took it too far. And I haven't even gotten to the book yet. And already the culture is driving me up a wall. The fanatical love of this story from fans, I don't see where it came from. It does not stand the test of time, in my opinion, because you can go to a used bookstore, you can go on Amazon, you can find these books for dirt cheap. Is it because the people who like the books are going to keep the books, or because they got the hardback editions, or because the people that read the books have now grown up and matured, and so have their tastes? I don't know, and frankly, I don't want to, because that would mean having to go back into the culture. All I know is, when the movie, based on your book, is better than the book it was based on, you have got a problem. Seriously, Stephanie Myers, what the fuck? The first book of your series reads like a very bad Mary Sue fanfiction, and I can't get too hard on you for that, because Lord knows I've written enough of those. But if you want me to let you in on a little secret, mine were bad because I didn't have a professional editor to help me with them. I mean, jeez. Did your editor not once come to you and say, you know what, I think we really need to drive a little sense of action here, or maybe, you know, instead of implying romance, we should actually outright state romance? Just a thought. I am hard-pressed to think of a worse book than Twilight. And I actually tried. I thought long and hard about this. And sadly, all I could come up with beyond the rest of the series was anything written by Ayn Rand. and that's bad when you're compared to Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, for those of you who don't know, was an author who wrote Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. I actually tried to read Atlas Shrugged to get a scholarship fund thing back in 2001, but the book was so filled with allegorical political nonsense that I couldn't finish it. I was putting me to sleep, and I barely got it even a quarter of the way into the book. It just... I'm sorry. Now, in retrospect, I enjoyed the movie much more than the book, and that's rare for me. I used to complain that the movies were stupid, and then I saw the first one twice because I was drugged to it by various people, and when I realized I was going to be sitting through it a second time, I was just... I literally was 2 seconds away from mad-libbing the whole thing. But my case in point for the bad characters, when Edward confirms her suspicions that he's a vampire, she just takes it in stride. No hyperventilating, no screaming, no nothing. It was just, hey, I'm a vampire. You're a vampire. Yeah, I just said that. Okay. That's not how life works. Vampires, by every definition, are predators. And in the case of man, they're kind of like the apex predator of the species. Now, there's something that predators do in the animals that they prey upon. It's called the fight or flight instinct. And they talk about this in high school biology, they talk about this in high school stuff, they talk about this in college classes. That, fight or flight is how animals have survived for centuries, for millennia. I don't recall in any of my courses there actually being a jump his undead bones mentality. I don't, unless that's just something inherent to teenage girls. Post that in the comments below. And, by the way, while we're on that subject, what woman in her right mind is going to insist on being impregnated with something that could possibly paralyze or kill her giving birth to it? Just my 2 cents. But all of that aside, I've got to come down to a verdict, and it wasn't easy. Because there are parts of this book that were legitimately good. It's just not enough to outweigh the bad. Plot, for example. Plot, I'm not giving that above a 3.5. It was a good idea. And extremely poorly executed. It's basically boy meets girl. They argue about dating. That's the plot. I'm not going to go any more in depth to it because that's the length and breadth of it. She meets him. They argue about whether or not they should date or not. Which, by the way, they go to the prom at the end of the school year. So they apparently came to some sort of decision. But we're not there to fucking see the argument that gave them the decision. No. We're not even there to see the climactic final battle because she passes out because her leg's broken. By the way, Stephanie Myers, if you want to have a climactic battle and your protagonist passes out, first-person view is not the best way to do it. The characters. The characters had potential. I'm going to give characterization a 5. And the only thing that gave that a 5 above a 4 is Alice. She's the only reason. Otherwise, it would have been a 4. Each vampire, it's amazing ideas. Each vampire having their own senses, their own special abilities. That's a great idea. It could, then you could delve into that. What gives them these abilities? What gives them these unique skills? Is it their personality while they're alive? Was it the method in which they were turned? What gives them these abilities? Don't just hand wave away with vampire. Don't do that. That was a great place for you to add depth to this world. It's a great idea because it gives a reason for them to form combines. It gives a reason for them to go as a pack or as a troop, a community. It gives good basis for this, other than because. And there's a lot of because in this book. And, Alice, why does she get visions when nobody else does? Why is Edward able to read thoughts? All of these missed opportunities. And then where you have the great opportunities that you missed, all the supporting cast. Not just the Cullens, Bella's father. Bella's father in the movie actually was a character. He had emotions. He had a role in the book. Her mother was actually present in the movie. Albeit very short time, but she was actually in it. In the book, the mother's barely there, and the father feels like it's just a cardboard standee, so that there's somebody else in the house. Jacob, who we had this huge community of Team Jacob for, comes off as a one-off in the book. He's there for a few scenes, doesn't really do anything pivotal, doesn't really say anything important. He's just there. He doesn't like Edward. That's important in a romance book. You have to have the disapproving rival. It's in the rules. But the thing that drags this down is the literal fact that I've stated earlier, that there's no character growth in this. Edward goes from stay away from me because what if I'm the bad guy, to stay away from me because you don't need to be turned. Oh, so you're not the bad guy, but you're not going to turn her so that you could prove that you're not the bad guy by letting her experience your life the same way you experience it. I don't get it. I do understand now, though, having read this first book, why Bella's vampire ability is the ability to negate other vampires' powers. Because, my gosh, she negated my brain reading this. Bella's change, because she does have a change. It's not a growth. It's more like a lateral movement, because now instead of not wanting to be in Forks because she was forced there by her mother marrying this baseball player guy and going to be traveling the country with him, now she wants to be in Forks because she wants to get with Edward. So now the rainy weather of Forks and having to live with her dad and this is like not an issue anymore. She meets a boy and suddenly everything's cool? Huh. Grammar and technique. Grammatically and technically, the book is excellent. There are almost no grammatical errors that are not evidently from typesetting or the occasional homonym, which that's going to slip by even the most dedicated of editors, which I have my questions about for this book. And the technicality of the book, it's fairly well written. It's not exactly high on the list of grade levels. I haven't actually given it a Fry analysis, so I couldn't tell you what grade level it's on, but I'm sure there's something out there on the web who have Fry analyzed this book. And there are very few technical errors, most of which can easily be chalked up to the fact that it's a first-person tale. It's told from Bella's point of view, and Bella is not exactly the brightest crayon in the box. So I can forgive misused sentences, misused phrases, because who knows, it could just be Bella. But things that really surprised me about this are the quote that I read at the very beginning of the review, of 3 things I was absolutely certain. Going into this book, I was sure that was going to be in the middle of a chapter where it just kills the impact of that sentence. And I was pleasantly surprised that she used that to close out a chapter, because that's the proper place for that line. That is an impactful line. And it would have been more impactful if the next chapter had started off with her still pondering those 3 things. But she says that one statement in her head, and we never hear her ponder those 3 things again. Ever. And yet, you say that line to anyone who's ever read the book or seen the movie, they'll be able to quote it word for you. I know. My cousins will attest to this. So, basically, grammatically and technically, it's a 7. It's well written. It's just the rest of the thing drags it down. And honestly, if you're going to have other elements of your book drag down a well-written book, that's just bad form.
It was bad form. Sit down now. Let's resume the game.
Pacing is by far the most consistent thing in this book. And that's a bad thing, because it's slow. It is painstakingly slow. It is basically a plot railroad with no interesting stops. It's very consistent, but so is a flatline EKG, which this book vastly resembles as far as excitement and character growth, mayhem. It's consistent. 3 out of 10. So, this book is probably one of the most mediocre books I've ever read. And I've read some bad books that I would rather read again than this. Death Troopers being one of them. And the reason Death Troopers is a bad book, because it's Star Wars with zombies. It's still better than Twilight. I mean, the plot is stagnant. The characters have no growth, if maybe a little, but it's lateral growth instead of expansionist. The plot is stagnant. There's no tension at all. Characters were given no reason to be invested in the story. You know, it's like reading a 14-year-old's diary. Only worse. So, final score, 4 out of 10. Don't email me this to me again. Don't email me to do another book of the Twilight series. Don't bring me anything, Stephanie Myers, ever again. If I touch Twilight again, if I touch that culture again, that one of us culture, it's going to be for the movies, and that's just going to be for a riff track. That's the only way I'll go back into this, riffing the movies. How she thinks this is a masterpiece, I don't understand. You know, maybe if somebody was to take it and rewrite it, you know, revision it, maybe inject some life into the characters, tell it from a third-person point of view, maybe something like that would have been better. I don't know. This is only a step above a dime store romance book. And frankly, those are horribly written, but at least they hold your attention. But we're moving on from this, and we're going to move on to our next review, which is Blood Fairy by India Drummond. Bye.